Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Jerry Firestein, Senior Vice President here at the Middle East Institute, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to today's conference, which will launch the Middle East Institute's cyber program and examine the many intersections of the cyber domain in the MENA region. Today's four panels and keynote address will seek to untangle the many threads of the technological revolution's impact on business, economics, security, and society. We have assembled diverse panelists from different fields joining us from around the world and hope that there will be ample engagement from our online audience as well. Many thanks to OWL Cyber Defense for their generous support of this conference. Before I introduce our keynote speaker, just a few logistical items. First, each segment today will be hosted on a separate Zoom webinar, for each of which you will need to register separately. You may find all of the information about the agenda for the day and details for registering for the next panel in our chat. For those of you joining us on Twitter, please use the hashtag MEICyber. If you have any questions or technical difficulties, please email events@mei.org. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, John Fleming. John is currently the Senior Director for Strategic Projects for OWL Cyber Defense. John recently completed a distinguished 30-year career at the CIA, where he retired at the assistant director level. During his career as an Arabist, he served nearly 2 decades on the ground in the Middle East with management positions over multiple war zone assignments and throughout the region. He holds a master's in science and national security strategy from the National War College and a BA from Lehigh University in international relations, a good Pennsylvanian. With his extensive background in security and in the Middle East, I'm looking forward to hearing his insights on this important subject. So, John, the floor is yours.
Sayyadati wa Sadati, ahlan wa sahlan bikum. And thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, for the very kind introduction. Again, I'd like to say welcome to the Middle East Institute's one-day webinar, focusing on the issue of the cyber domain in the Middle East, implications for business, security, and society. As the Ambassador mentioned, my name is John Fleming, and I am Director of Strategic Projects at OWL Cyber Defense Solutions, which is indeed co-sponsoring today's event. In April, I retired after a 30-year career. As the Ambassador noted, I left as an assistant director. Of that 30 years, the vast majority of that time included lots of time in the Middle East, multiple war zone assignments, or doing supporting efforts from back here on the Washington side. One thing I wanted to tackle early on is that although the rogue, unaccountable spy melodramas you see in movies and TV make great entertainment, and I know I watch them myself, great intelligence work is really a team effort aimed at learning ground truth for policymakers to make informed decisions. The great intelligence officers that I've encountered in my career were successful due to their ability to forge deep and lasting partnerships in the region. They knew the language, they knew the culture, and most importantly, they knew the people. When I started my career, I, like many of you, became deeply enamored with the Middle East, its languages, its culture, history, and it was that affinity that drew me in. I learned Arabic language and embarked on a great adventure that took me to almost every corner of the Arab world. At the outset, I will confess to having had only a simplistic and romantic notion, loosely grounded in reality, about what the Middle East was. But I was eager to learn and make a difference in this alluring but unforgiving milieu. So I leaned into and embraced my lack of understanding and committed to the journey, absorbing as much as I could along the way. Needless to say, in the intervening time since I became involved in the Middle East in the early 90s, much has changed. One of those areas was at that tiny intersection of technology and information called the internet. I would add that none of us, and when I say none of us, I mean all of us human beings at the time, really saw the totality of what was coming at us in the information revolution. When I arrived in the Middle East in the early 90s, and I know saying this will put me squarely in the old timers camp, there really was no internet to speak of. Colleagues traveling to the region, I think Ambassador Firestein will remember this, colleagues traveling to the region for temporary duty would bring that antecedent to the internet called newspapers, and in contravention of every post 9/11 security regulation, hand carry mail back to the US for posting from inside the continental United States, which we euphemistically called the Pony Express. But the internet really started to creep into our collective unconscious here and in the Middle East throughout the 1990s. But it was not until the post 9/11 counterterrorism fight that the cyber realm really came into its own as a recognized threat to national and regional security, based largely on its ability to promulgate information quickly. The US was not alone in this new battle space, and regional partners stepped up to fight a common terrorist enemy, both in real life and virtually. The threat had metastasized in the form of websites which targeted vulnerable populations in the Middle East for radicalization. At the time, as I recall, the US military referred to the cyber domain as uncontested battle space. And the first cyber warriors were born to get after that problem. But now, the era of websites with radical messaging constituting the main threat vector seems almost quaint, as the internet itself has developed into something more akin to a utility such as power or water. Cyber threats now cut across all fields of human endeavor: commerce, critical infrastructure and control systems, national defense, healthcare, finance and banking, and education. As the father of 3 children, I, as many of you, witnessed the utilitarian aspect of the internet as our schools recently struggled to quickly provide educational services in response to the pandemic. I suspect much of what we will be discussing today will have this ubiquitous reliance of the internet as kind of the backdrop. So there's an inside joke in the CIA that the decision to be selected into the elite ranks of the Directorate of Operation hinges almost entirely on an innate aversion to the use of slides in a presentation. So I'm going to remain true to that in the private sector. I have exactly 2 slides to share. So I'm going to, well, I see I will not be able to bring up those slides there. The function seems to be disabled, but that's quite all right. I have a general overview that I'm going to talk to you today about. To kick off today's presentation, I thought it'd be useful to start with a strategic overview of the forces at play in the region, some old and some new, and then tie them back to the cyber domain with some candid input from some of OWL Cyber Defense Solutions customers working in the region. I will add at the outset of this short format, I will not get to every corner of every issue, but rather this presentation represents my assessment and subjective firsthand experience. And to close out my remarks, I want to talk about a subject that has received scant attention from the so-called Middle East experts, and that is the subject of pizza and Yemen. So hang on with me to the end and you'll find out, you'll hear that story. So the first issue I wanted to tackle in things that I think are relevant are the pandemic's effects. As with all great historical upheavals, there will be unforeseen consequences in the cyber domain as a result of COVID-19. But in these early stages, we can observe some early indicators and make some informed predictions. Cyber attacks will almost certainly not diminish. They may increase, but there is no evidence to support the idea of a decrease. Attackers will seek to take advantage of the disordered state of affairs to probe for and exploit weaknesses in the region's cyber defenses. And I'm thinking here really of 3 particular areas to keep an eye on: sensitive personal health information being moved outside of normal protected channels for the sake of speed, public and private funding intended for treatment, charities, or research, and proprietary information related to research into vaccines and COVID-19 treatments. In the unique case of cyber commerce in the Middle East, where the souk has long reigned supreme, I do believe there will be some movement on the consumer side to accept the idea of internet shopping to a greater degree than in the past. You know, the population is generally used to visiting the souk and making purchases in person. I think there'll be some movement of the needle on that issue. The long-standing issues of the Middle East are something I think I'd like to address here as well. I call them the Middle East pre-existing conditions. First and foremost is the Sunni-Shia Divide. In the course of my professional lifetime, this issue as a conflict driver has gone from bad to worse. I recall vividly the absence of obvious sharp outward divisions in Yemen between the Zaydi Shias and Sunni population in that early part of my career. I also fondly recall being welcomed to attend a Shia mass wedding with 20 grooms in Hufuf, in the eastern province of Saudi Arabia. There was tension and discrimination, to be sure, but nothing resembling the scale we see today. I will address modern Iran's bid for regional hegemony separately, but on the purely religious side, it must be said that there remain no serious drivers towards Islamic ecumenism, with deeply held convictions still the order of the day on both sides. The proxies for both sides will continue to wage war in the shadows. The cyber realm is one area where the conflict will continue to play out. Oil as a key economic driver. Despite many attempts to diversify, Gulf states and Iran continue to rely on oil revenue as the main driver for their economies. The recent Saudi abortive price war with Russia had already sent prices lower before the pandemic. A slow climb out of the economic hole we are all in probably means reduced demand in the near term. In the medium term, advancing technology in the energy sector means the clock is ticking on making progress in much needed economic diversification. Humanitarian centers of crisis that predate the coronavirus. So I think there are really three countries to talk about, Syria, Libya, and Yemen. For Syria, just as a kind of a personal aside, my first experience in Syria was taking a taxi from Amman, Jordan to the border and switching cabs for the ride to Damascus, where I stayed at a hostel run by Salesian nuns. I had to talk to the Syrian border guards and customs people for an eternity of coffees and teas, so amused they were by my Arabic, which I don't know if it was because it was really so great or because they just thought it was hilariously unintelligible. As an aside, the Hamadiyya souk in Damascus for Arabists is probably the thing that comes closest to that romantic notion I talked about. It's a beautiful set among Roman ruins in the middle of Damascus. I drank pomegranate juice from a communal cup off the backpack of a street seller. I doubt in our pandemic age that guy will be making a comeback anytime soon. But more seriously, of course, that Syria was the Syria of Hafez al-Assad. It's long gone now. And what is left behind is a partially functioning Bashar al-Assad regime in control of limited parts of the country, propped up by Russian, Iranian, and Hezbollah efforts. Libya remains broken, and like Syria, has attracted the interest of foreign powers such as Turkey and Russia. When you add in fierce tribalism, regionalism, and porous borders, you get a witch's brew of sustained internecine conflict. I hold fond memories for that 9/11 pre-Houthi Yemen that was one of my first experiences in the Middle East. At that time, so before 9/11, before the Houthi issue, we thought we had, from the US government perspective, a challenging but manageable set of unsolvable economic problems. But it was nevertheless peaceful and had a functioning central government that had some purchase throughout the country. As subsequent events were to show, there was zero margin to bear the weight of additional problems before 9/11 and the Houthi conflict. Yemen is perhaps the worst of the three cases with little cause for optimism. I do not expect to see significant progress toward resolution of these crises in the near term. terrorism issues, the threat from Al-Qaeda, ISIL, and other Sunni extremist groups. I will not spend a lot of time here on an issue that in so many ways dominated my professional life at the agency, but suffice to say that the threat has not gone away, and all indicators point to an effort to attempt to exploit the COVID-19 situation in an effort to reverse their substantial territorial losses in the region. Cyber gangs and criminal activity. Cyber attacks emanating from state actors should in no way diminish the threat from cyber criminal activity, which businesses and individuals in the region faced at above average rates before the pandemic. It may well be the case that worsening global economic conditions and the elevated unemployment levels that go with it will set the condition for an increase in all forms of cyber criminal activity. We'll just have to be on the lookout for that. US-Iran relations, tensions related to history. I think I do not need to rehash for this audience, but the tensions seem to have temporarily abated somewhat, but I think this is more out of a preoccupation with the pandemic response as opposed to a change in the level of provocative actions that are occurring or some kind of change in policy from Washington or from Tehran. Things like the tanker issue with Venezuela, the U.S. Navy encounters with Iranian naval vessels in the Gulf. These are very dangerous situations that could escalate on any given day as a result of miscalculation. And of course, the killings of Qasem Soleimani and Abu Mahdi al-Mohandes, Iran views these as unresolved issues. Iran and the Gulf states also have their own tensions, which all similarly seem to have subsided a bit, but really it's only deferred, and we should expect all of these to resurface when governments in the region and around the world get a handle on the coronavirus issue. At that time, they'll be able to refocus on more traditional questions related to national interest. And I think you'll see that tension will come back. But Iranian regional sway or outright control is to them the natural and correct state of affairs. And I can recall vividly a conversation I had many years ago with an Iranian official who was very affable in his small talk, right up until the point that we discussed the leadership and governments of the Gulf states. At their mention, his eyes got glassy and he took on that look of hate-filled derangement that is unfortunately much too easy to encounter in the region. He did not mince words about his ardent belief of the plain wrongness of the existence of the Gulf states. There are a few new variables out there. Turkey, Israel, Iraq, Qatar, Saudi tensions, oil energy prices. So for Turkey, I think while the relative degree of Islamization of the once secular-led Turkey in the person of Recep Tayyip Erdogan is debatable, the reassertion of a more Ottoman-style ambition in the region is clear. The Turkish involvement in Syria and Libya show a greater willingness to intervene directly with some of the same Iranian kind of attitude of these were once mine and really ought to be again today kind of attitude. Israel, again, it's a very complex issue and we could talk for a very, very long time on the subject, but the Israelis and some of the Gulf states at least have made common cause against Iran. These fragile and self-interested gains are tenuous with the Israeli Prime Minister's annexation plans for parts of the West Bank as the tinder for more instability going forward. As a two-state solution is receding into the distance as a viable possibility with no other construct available to take its place. The question of Iraq, I think, is another key issue that is a very difficult one to pin down. Whither goest Iraq is both a fair and wholly unanswerable question, but it is a central question to durable regional stability. Much has been made of the Iranians' ability to project power in the region up to the Mediterranean, threaten Israeli security from Syrian territory, either through proxies or with their own forces, creating the so-called Shia Crescent or land bridge. Iraq continues to struggle with basic identity and governance issues, to be sure, but I can tell you it is my belief, based on personal experience, that no foreign actor can tell the Iraqi people what to do, at least not for very long. There's a long road to hoe in terms of addressing the governance questions, particularly in a time of limited oil revenue. But the elevation of the able Mustafa al-Kadhimi to the prime ministership is a positive step forward. The Qatar-Saudi tensions, I don't think I need to spend a lot of time on that, but that will continue to crop up from time to time. Let me talk a little bit about OWL's experience in the region in the time I have left. So all of this is to say that the threat to the internet and cyber stability is real. And in turn, the threat to all basic infrastructure, power, water and wastewater, telecommunications, energy production, is all very real. In the same way that the internet is now tightly intertwined with commerce, education, and entertainment, it is just as tightly woven into the basic operations of plants, refineries, substations, pipelines, and a host of other operational environments. So whether it's moving data to the cloud, performing remote command and control, or analyzing data at a centralized point, the lure of interconnecting the far reaches of an enterprise also lures threat actors to try to gain access and disrupt those very same operations. To our customers in the region, the threat is measured in human economic impact. The need has never been stronger to employ the most rigorous defenses available to protect an ever-growing population of digital assets, those assets that are now the heartbeat of critical infrastructure. At the end of a visit to a critical infrastructure site by one of our OWL representatives in the region, the local manager requested an additional meeting in his office. And he said, have a look out that window there. Do you see that, the Stilling Tower? That must keep operating. That is my #1 priority, and it has to keep going. Otherwise, there'll be a tremendous impact on the economy and the community, and I cannot take any risks with it. And we have lots and lots, many stories from OWL customers in the region with a similar emphasis on the need to keep infrastructure going. Critical infrastructure are strategic assets which should be protected with the same vigor as any national asset. And I have to pause here for a moment and remind people that we're not talking about leaking some embarrassing emails. We are talking about widespread disruption of critical infrastructure operations with economic impact and the ability to affect regional stability. I'm sure we will hear more about this throughout the day with specific trends in subsequent panels and discussions. So just to sum up quickly, I think it is absolutely the case that increasingly digitized economies in the Gulf will be a subject of increasing interest from malevolent cyber actors, both at the state level and organized crime level. The pandemic may have created the perception of increased vulnerabilities in the healthcare and finance sectors, as large funding streams from governments and charities are moved to address urgent requirements. And I do think all this is happening while there is some downward pressure on cyber defense budgets, given the price of oil. So the last and most important thing, pizza and Yemen. So you stuck with me through the end, so you're rewarded by the story. After just this one little public service announcement, let's say. So after reviewing my presentation for today, what struck me was the negative tone that it sets, which may be just the intelligence officer in me. It is not the message that I want to leave you with, however. While the picture I painted is somewhat dark, I have to say that I am not sure that the overall threat to peaceful and constructive use of the internet is actually all that much greater in the Middle East than it is in the rest of the world. I sometimes wonder, are we, in thinking of the Middle East in these darker terms, only dragging our collective Western memory of this trope of endless conflict in the Middle East and projecting it into the cyber domain and arriving at some conclusion that the Middle East is somehow doomed to have more cyber issues than anywhere else? I think it's a very good question to contemplate. Cyber warfare is not region specific, right? It follows the drumbeat of state-to-state conflict, and cyber crime is opportunistic and flows like to where the barriers to crime are the lowest. Sadly, these factors are not specific to the Middle East and are global in nature. Okay, the pizza story. So as a young man, I was in Yemen and I needed a pizza. I just needed a pizza. It just so happened that Sana'a was bereft of anything approaching real pizza at the time. In an epic tactical relocation from Sana'a, Colonel Sanders had withdrawn all 11 of the herbs and spices in his secret recipe, leaving behind a former restaurant facade with the signage altered to read Kent K Chicken. That ended the list of American fast food available in Sana'a. A friend of mine and I heard that a new and very real Pizza Hut was opening in Aden, some 200 miles to the south. My friend and I decided to make the 9-hour drive through Damar, Yarim, and Habalane to satisfy the craving. The Sana'a-Aden road winds down from almost 10,000 feet in elevation where Sana'a is located to a rocky plain that extends out to Aden. As it happens, my normally dependable Land Cruiser broke down maybe 50 miles north of Yemen. I believe the village was called Gulmudran, but I wouldn't swear to it. My friend and I knew no one there, and while the atmosphere across Yemen was not yet awash in extremist thinking, kidnappings were frequent and north-south tension from the civil war hung in the air like an unresolved chord. All the plot elements for a movie where Ben Affleck, or I suppose it could be Matt Damon and a bunch of Navy SEALs come to rescue me and my friend, all those very well-known plot elements were all there. But it didn't play out like that. A local sheikh stood up to help us and guaranteed the safety of the Land Cruiser until we could travel by taxi for the last 50 miles to Aden and pick up a mechanic and a part, it was a timing belt, to effect the repair the following day. So we went down to Aden to pick the part, came back. I expected to come back to a raft of excuses and no vehicle, or perhaps arrive to witness the sheikh bolting his Russian Dushka machine gun on the back of what was no longer my Land Cruiser. But no, we were welcomed back as friends, and my Land Cruiser was fine. We sat for tea and coffee as the Yemeni mechanic, as I recall, he literally submerged himself under the hood of the vehicle to make the repair. And when he was done, we left as friends. Oh, and to finish the story, my friend and I completed the journey to Aden, and later that evening tucked into the best beef pepperoni sausage pizza I had before or since. So I know I'm getting close to time here, but just the reason I tell this story is to tell the following point. The Middle East is not an inanimate alternate reality where violent things just happen. Real people with real feelings live there. Over the course of my career, I have a corollary to this story to tell in every country in the Middle East. And in many cases, the stakes were much, much higher than a timing belt. I've witnessed great personal sacrifice and risk to accomplish missions where the stakes were quite literally life or death. They were leaders with titles and uniforms, yes, but also ordinary people standing up to help to do the right thing while asking nothing in return, with only the distant promise of a better tomorrow to lean on. It is this spirit of the peoples of the Middle East that OWL believes will overcome the litany of problems that I talked about just now. And they will be able to remake the face of the Middle East. It will take time, but we at OWL believe that investing in an indomitable human spirit is always a good business decision. So thank you very much for your time today. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the panel discussions. Thank you very much.
And thank you, John, for a great presentation and for reestablishing the point that one needn't depend on slides in order to make a number of important points. So we do appreciate it. We appreciate your time. We appreciate the audience for joining us for this. We do hope that you can all participate in the following panels. The next panel is going to start soon. And again, you can find the registration information in our chat. So thank you, and we'll see you at the next panel.
Thank you very much. Bye.